Carl Jung said that, in all his years as a clinician, none of his patients had been really healed who did not regain a religious outlook on life. But what does this regaining of a religious outlook mean? That's going to be the central question of this video, since I think it offers an antidote to Nietzsche's nihilism. Friedrich Nietzsche famously declared that God is dead. Nietzsche was writing in a time after the Enlightenment and the Scientific Revolution. Europeans were increasingly understanding the world through science and reason alone. In this new way of seeing the world, religion and belief in God had become increasingly suspect, what with Christian supernatural elements and supposing the existence of a big being in the sky. But religions had given humanity a place within the cosmos. They had grounded and oriented our lives for millennia. In his parable of the madman, Nietzsche writes, "Whither is God? I will tell you. We have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. But how did we do this? How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving now? Away from all suns? Are we not plunging continually backward, sideward, forward in all directions? Is there still any up or down? Are we not straying, though, through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder?" Nietzsche's parable warns us that we have killed God and the potential for objective values, but that leaves us in a deeply disorienting mode of being. Morally, how will we be able to make sense of what is good? Nietzsche wrote scathing critiques of morality, after all. And existentially, in this void of meaning, won't we fall prey to nihilism? We wouldn't know up from down anymore. We'd be left drifting in cold space. Rather than having a place in the cosmos, as part of the cosmos, we're confronted by a meaningless existence, the void. Emanuel Levinas says that this stark confrontation with existence leads us to become nauseated, alienated, and repulsed by how distinct and different we are from it all. Malaise sinks in, a deep skin-crawling discomfort with encountering the totality of existence that is other than ourselves. The self ends up problematizing itself and its own existence to the degree of absurdity. Anxiety and existential dread sink in. Many existential philosophers have offered their answers to this meaning crisis. Nietzsche himself championed the idea that humanity could make its own values, find its own meaning, purpose, and moral orientation. This is exemplified by his Übermensch. He argued that this superhuman could transcend nihilism by affirming life through a process of creative self-overcoming. Crucially, this Übermensch, he proposed, could overcome existence and live triumphantly according to his own values. Through the self's willpower, Nietzsche believed that he could overcome nihilism and the void. Jean-Paul Sartre offered the idea of living authentically in the face of existential anxiety. He argued that if we can just be as authentic as possible to our inner self, then we can actively construct meaning through our free choices, rather than succumb to the anxiety brought about by the immense responsibility of existence. Albert Camus, on the other hand, said that we need to embrace the absurdity of our lives. Like Sisyphus, we need to learn to enjoy pointlessly rolling the rock up the hill. As Camus famously remarked, one must imagine Sisyphus happy. But I'd argue that all of these approaches don't work. The self is so finite, so limited, that no matter how much authenticity, embracing of absurdity, or courageous willpower we can muster, we will never overcome existence. The totality of existence is just too immense to be overcome. The void of meaning ends up swallowing us whole at some point. This is similar to what Nishitani Keiji argues for in his book, The Self-Overcoming of Nihilism. Nishitani offers a different way out of nihilism. Instead of emphasizing the importance of the self, as all the other existentialists do, borrowing from his Zen background, Nishitani encourages us to move away from self-concern, and he says that we should surrender ourselves to the void and the totality of existence, giving ourselves away to it freely. Now, this surrendering to existence is not radical defeat or apathy, but rather a kind of radical move into love. Instead of being consumed by ourselves, we move into being concerned with what is beyond ourselves. The finitude, and Nishitani would say the impermanence of the self, gives way to emptiness. A nirvana where self and the other are seen to be one. So we could put it this way. Instead of trying to overcome existence, we flip the equation. The self becomes a part of the whole rather than excluded from it. I think this relates well with Carl Jung's idea about adopting a religious worldview. Carl Jung was inspired by these same existential questions. Adopting a religious worldview was Jung's general view of how we could attain an integration of the conscious and unconscious aspects of our mind so that we can have psychological wholeness. As Jung states in the final pages of his book, Modern Man in Search of a Soul, we thus come to those ultimate questions. Whence does consciousness come? What is the psyche? And at this point, all science ends. It is as though, at the culmination of the illness, the destructive powers were converted into healing forces. This is brought about by the fact that the archetypes come to independent life and serve as spiritual guides for the personality, thus supplanting the inadequate ego with its futile willing and striving. As the religious-minded person would say, guidance has come from God. With most of my patients, I have to avoid this formulation, for it reminds them too much of what they have come to reject. I must express myself in more modest terms and say that the psyche has awakened to spontaneous life. To the patient, it is nothing less than a revelation when, from the hidden depths of the psyche, something arises to confront him, something strange that is not the I and is therefore beyond the reach of personal caprice. He has gained access to the source of psychic life, and this marks the beginning of the cure. What Jung came to the conclusion of was that we need to change our relationship with existence, our outlook on life, instead of emphasizing the self in all of the discrete and reductive desires. As Jung says, what makes us ill is that it arises from having no love but only sexuality. No faith because we're afraid to grope in the dark. No hope because we're disillusioned by the world and by life. And no understanding because we've failed to read the meaning of our own existence. So, to conclude, through Jung, we are offered a religious outlook on life from having integrated the conscious and unconscious aspects of ourselves, enabling us to shift into psychological wholeness. Through Nishitani and Buddhism, we are offered a religious outlook on life from having let go of our egoic self-concern and instead embraced the whole of existence. Both offer us ways of how we can move beyond an overly egoic and limited sense of self that confronts an estranged relationship with existence towards a more wondrous and wholesome sense of self within life. I would say that this religious outlook stems from an embodied and experientially known quality of finding ourselves in deep integration and connection with existence. This religious outlook on life naturally leads us to feelings of being in union and connection with existence, rather than the alienation and anxiety from being separate from it. But the devil remains. As conscious and rational beings, despite our spiritual intuitions, we can't help hearing those whispers. But is it real? How do you know? Isn't this just superstition? In a future video, I'm going to try to take a closer look at the scientific and philosophical issues at the core of this skepticism about the reality of our experience and the reality of values in general. Subscribe if you're curious to see that video when it comes out, and thank you for watching. I hope this has helped.